We are going live on the Facebook. All right. So welcome everybody to Masters Monday. Masters Monday is a partnership and brought to you by Village Drive Village, a nonprofit organization that you can not only partake in the Fairfax area, but also if you are watching from outside of the Fairfax area, you can set up one of these nonprofits in your neighborhood as well. This is also being sponsored by the Focus on Nova Real Estate Group. My name is Lynn Norusis, and this is Tracey Barrett, both part of the Focus on Nova Real Estate team. So thank you so much for joining us. And I see that I somehow am on here twice. Don't know how that happened. But I am so grateful to be able to introduce our guest this evening, Michael Pope. So many of you probably know of Michael Pope. He has been a journalist in the Virginia area for quite some time. He is an author. He lives in Old Town Alexandria. He's reported for NPR, the New York Daily News, and the Alexandria Gazette Packet. He's also an author of 4 different books, and we're going to get into that next time he's joining us in December for our Masters Monday. But today, Michael is here to discuss a story that he worked on a while ago, and it is just absolutely fascinating. It is the history behind the German POWs in Alexandria during World War II. So many of us know of Fort Hunt over in the area and have gone there maybe on field trips or just day trips, but there is that secret little history behind it. And prisoners of war were detained at the top secret camp over in the Fort Hunt area. It was a camp that the Army set up for some of the most important scientists and German officers that were captured during the war. And it was under the code name PO Box 1142. Don't know how much of a code that was, since that was actually the address of where they were being held, but they were held. There were about almost 3,500 German prisoners of war that were interrogated there between the years of 1942 and 1945. So Michael is here to talk to us about that, give us some insight and some history. Now, this is a webinar, so know that is okay that you do not see your face on the screen, and your microphones are muted. So if you have any questions that you would like us to ask Michael throughout the talk, go ahead and make sure to put them in the chat. Now that is through Zoom. We will try to also monitor our Facebook Live feed to catch any questions that come in there as well. So Michael, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and I will let you take it away.
Well, great. I really appreciate the invitation. And can you hear me okay? Good, excellent. So before I begin, I want to make sure that everybody watching knows I want your questions. I really like the sort of Q&A sort of feedback part of this. So please keep the questions coming, because I would rather respond to questions than just talk indefinitely. But I really do appreciate the invitation. As Lynn said, I've been in Northern Virginia since 2004 is when my wife and I moved here. And I work for the Alexandria Gazette Packet, which is part of Connection newspapers. So there's a chain of newspapers I write for, including the Mount Vernon Gazette, the Arlington Connection, the Springfield Connection, that whole chain. And also currently work for Virginia Public Radio, which is a statewide network of NPR stations. So, which includes WWII. So you might hear me on local NPR station every now and then. But years ago, I had heard about this secret Nazi interrogation camp at Fort Hunt. And the whole premise of it just sounded so out there, so unbelievable that I've had to know more. So I did have an opportunity to write the story for Northern Virginia Magazine. And I came across all of these interviews that were done with different people that had been involved, people that did the interrogation, people that were interrogated. The National Park Service actually did sort of an oral history where they had people do the interviews, and then they were transcribed. And so I didn't get a chance to hear any of the audio, but I did read many of these transcripts. And one of my problems in life is that I keep everything. You might see behind me, I keep all these books. There's no reason to keep all these books. But I also, surprising even to me, I kept all of my notes from researching this thing, of which there are many. So what I did to do the story, sorry about that. What I did to the story was read through all of these transcripts of different people, and then, sort of took notes and then kind of combined them into, what eventually appeared in the in Northern Virginia magazine. And it really is a fascinating story about, the Americans, of course, wanted any intelligence they could about Germany and German technology and how the Navy was operating, how they were interrogating people, what kind of machinery they were using. And so they had this idea that, when they captured these German scientists, that they would interrogate them. But so the key here, though, is like when you hear the word interrogation, normally you think of the cold, dank room with maybe, the singular light bulb hanging from the ceiling. And it's like an uncomfortable thing where you sort of you make someone so uncomfortable that they tell you whatever it is that you need to know. This was not that. This was the exact opposite of that, which is based on more of a British model, where you put somebody up, like the way the British did it is they would put somebody up in like a swanky British country estate, like you're staying at the world's finest hotel. And then they would sort of treat you nice, treat you like a star, basically, like a celebrity, like a VIP, and sort of get information out of you that way. I think about this as the honey versus vinegar sort of dichotomy, right? Like you can get more information in this case, you can get more out of life with honey versus vinegar. So this was an approach that was designed to make these German scientists as comfortable and as like they're having the time of their life, basically. So they will tell you anything that you need to know by making them comfortable. So again, this was designed on a kind of a British model. This is how the British would put people up in these country estates. So if you read these narratives that were done by the National Park Service, you put together kind of a picture of daily life, what it was like from these years between 1942 to 1945. So we're talking about sort of the early 1940s. As Lynn said, about 3,500, more than 3,000 Germans were interrogated there, and they would cycle them in and out. Like they would come in and, they would be treated nice and interrogated, and then they would circle out and go to some other camp somewhere else. So they were really only there for the time period that they were getting information extracted out of them. So the picture of daily life that emerges is really fascinating, and it really belies your sort of mental image about prisoner of war camp. So there was softball, there was soccer, there was a swimming pool. I mean, we're talking about like a VIP, hotel here. There were trips to the movie theater, there were cigarettes, there was liquor. They had lots of reading material. The Germans apparently really liked reading material that they didn't consider biased. So they liked the New York Times, they liked Life magazine, they really liked the Christian Science Monitor. They had a dog. The dog's name was Rigor Mortis, which is a fascinating name for a dog, right? Especially around Halloween. It was more like a clubhouse, and they were, and it wasn't just there. They were also taken on trips, like not just to the movie theater, but one particularly funny anecdote, I actually opened the magazine story with this, is they take these German prisoners to this department store in DC. It's not there anymore. It's called Landsberg. And they take them to like the ladies' underwear counter. So like the German scientists were going to buy underwear for their wives or girlfriends back home, here in DC on 7th Avenue. And, they must have really made a scene. Like they're wearing their leather jackets and their felt hats. And I mean, they kind of looked like they were straight out of a beer commercial. And things kind of veered out of hand when they asked the Germans about, okay, so what size do you want? What size ladies' underwear like should we give you so you can mail it off? And one of the German scientists took out his slide rule, to start measuring. I think that's when things kind of fell down. But they were taken to restaurants in Alexandria. So I mean, they really got a sense of what life was like in Northern Virginia. And you also get, one of the things that emerged from the oral histories is you also get a sense the neighbors in the Fort Hunt area probably kind of knew what was going on there, behind closed doors. But it was secret. It was top secret. As Lynn said, the code name was P.O. Box 1142. That was actually the code name of this secret operation. And it actually was the address. If you wanted to mail something to this facility in Fort Hunt, you would mail it to P.O. Box 1142. So the secret code name was the actual address. And it, let me see, the daily life, there were microphones hidden everywhere. So really what they wanted to capture was not just the interrogations. That was of course important to capture, but they wanted to capture the discussion of the prisoners among each other. And so that was another key part to see if they could capture any information or intelligence that way. And of course, these prisoners are very, very intelligent, sharp people. So they quickly realized that there were microphones everywhere. And so they would do these things where they would have like mock interrogation sessions with each other to kind of make fun of the Americans. And they would also sort of tell these long, elaborate stories to kind of amuse themselves. So you get the sense that they were kind of toying with the Americans in a sense. There was only one person to attempt an escape. It was a U-boat captain by the name of Werner Henk. And he was a daredevil Navy officer. And he had kind of a bad reputation because he apparently before he was captured and taken to Fort Hunt, he sunk this British ship called the Ceramic, and he ended up gunning down the crew. So they sunk the ship, the crew was like floating in the water, and then he ordered his men to machine gun and kill all of these British sailors, like as they were, trying to swim to safety. So that was pretty bad. So when he ended up at Fort Hunt and was being interrogated, the interrogators knew this, and they tried to sort of use it as leverage against him. And so they brought in this guy to make him look like one of the Canadian mounted police, as if he was going to be extradited to Canada. And so this guy knew if he ever had to sort of face the consequences of his actions, what he did with these British sailors, that would be very bad for him. So they got him to talk, but there was fraud. There was like, a lot of this stuff was the Americans would fake a lot of stuff. So they had like a lot of what they did was kind of good cop, bad cop sort of thing. So they would have these fake Red Cross people come in, and they were the good cops, and they would try to coax if the Germans weren't talking, if the liquor and the swimming pool wasn't enough, they would have the Red Cross workers come in and kind of coax them into sort of telling what they knew. So that was the good cop. They also had the bad cop, which was the Russian agents. So the Germans were very afraid of the Russians. And so any idea that the Russians might take them back to Moscow or something was like horrifying to them. So that was the bad cop. If the Red Cross agent didn't work, and the liquor didn't work, and the women didn't work, and the trip to the DC ladies' underwear counter didn't work, then you'd bring in the fake Russian agent. And you get the sense also, some of these German scientists sort of put it together that, there was some fraud going on. So you kind of wonder, how much information they really got. I actually never, after reading all the transcripts and everything, I never really got a sense of what they missed out on, so like they did collect a lot of information. And of course, we don't really have a full grasp of what they captured. What I was looking at was the transcripts of what people remembered many, many years later. So you kind of have to also keep that in mind, is that these people are not working from documents. They're just telling you what their memories were of the 1940s. And, these interviews were pretty recently. So this guy was interviewed in May of 2010. This guy was interviewed in 2011. So, these are 2007 is when this person was interviewed, 2008. So, these are all, pretty recent interviews of stuff that happened quite a long time ago. And again, they're not working from documents. They're just telling you what they remembered. And most of what, people's memory was the day-to-day life, the playing cards and the playing tricks on the Americans. One of the people who was imprisoned there, I guess you could say, and being interrogated, he knew the microphones were everywhere. So he would jump on the bed and see how long it took the Americans to come in and make him stop jumping on the bed. So they would play these games with each other, which I'm sure was really fun. So so this is 1942. I see some on our chat here. It looks like someone was asking about the years, 1942 to 1945. And let me see. We also have a chat on here. What was the premise they were at Fort Hunt for? What were they told? They were told that they were there to be interrogated. I don't think that they were there under any false pretenses. The Germans who were being interrogated, lightly interrogated, they certainly knew they were there for information to be extracted from them. I don't think that was being hidden from them. But there's another interesting way to look at that, which is why were they at Fort Hunt as opposed to somewhere else? So the history of Fort Hunt is actually kind of interesting, and going way back to before World War II, Fort Hunt had a secret radio monitoring station. So the United States government used the facility there to monitor radio traffic from Germany and Italy and Japan and Mexico. So that was kind of the existing kind of infrastructure of what was going on there when, the Americans decided they needed some place to interrogate these Germans, and they picked Fort Hunt. I would imagine likely because of the proximity to Washington, D.C. And so I think that probably played a role. There were two operations at Fort Hunt. I spent all of my time looking at one. I didn't spend much time looking at the other, but it is equally as fascinating. And some researcher should probably pick this up. So what I was looking at was the interrogation operation, which was named MIS-Y, as in like Mission Y. There was a whole separate operation there, which was really fascinating, called MIS-X, which I guess is like Mission X. And that was a training program to teach Americans how to escape war zones. And so they had all these books and classes and like James Bond style equipment, but like they had all these kind of secret radios. And so the education was, okay, so if you find yourself behind enemy lines, here's the psychology that might be involved in getting people to trust you and like you and sort of ingratiate yourself with the locals and that sort of thing. If you're being interrogated, here's how the Germans might interrogate you. And here's the German interrogation methods that they might use on you. Here's how the Japanese might, and the whole separate style of interrogations. If the Japanese capture you and interrogate you, here's what you might expect if you're being interrogated by the Japanese army. If you feel like you need to end everything, here are some suggested ways of committing suicide. It was really very detailed. They also had all this crazy whacked out James Bond style equipment, like a deck of cards that when you assemble the deck of cards, it would show a map. And this stuff is still around. It's actually in a National Park Service kind of archive, strangely located at Arlington National Cemetery. So when I was researching this story, the folks at the National Park Service let me visit their room where they keep all this stuff, which is kind of in a non-public area of the cemetery complex. It's actually right behind Robert E. Lee's house, kind of off to the side. There's this building, not open to the public, but they let me go there. and they keep all of this stuff. So all of these transcripts of the interviews are all kept there, but they also actually keep a lot of this stuff too. So this secret MISX program of teaching people to escape war zones wasn't just teaching them, it was also giving them equipment that they might use. So there would be like radios that were hidden in cigarette lighters and this sort of stuff. This stuff is still around. It's actually in all these boxes, and I got to rifle through the boxes, and wow, that was really something. This operation, the non-interrogation part of what happened at Fort Ward, there was also a lot of translation. So there were cryptologists there. There were 14 cryptologists that were stationed there, and they worked at these really long 22-foot tables. The building was called the Creamery. I don't have no clue why it was called the Creamery, but that's what they called the operation where they did all of these things. And they were constantly like translating maps and orders and photographs and newspapers and magazines. And they had all of this weird sort of James Bond coded kind of thing where they would teach you how to write coded letters. So you would handwrite out a letter, and it would sort of look like it was to your girlfriend or to your significant other, but in reality, there was a coded message. And so you had to know not just how to read the message, but you would have a different way of decoding it based on what day of the week. So the letters in those days, of course, had at the top, it would say it was written on Monday, October, whatever. So that the day would give you in your mind what kind of code to use to decode the letter, like what would the math that was going to be. And so if you read it, it just looks like a letter to a significant other, but in reality you could sort of decode it and send messages back and forth beyond enemy lines and that sort of thing. And so it was really fascinating digging through all of these interviews that were done. It was a little frustrating because people tend to talk in a way that's different than if they were to write something. So if all these people had written out their experiences, it might be a little more linear, as opposed to just having a conversation with someone and having them say whatever they're going to say. So especially people that are remembering things that happened, in the 1940s, and it's 2008 when they do the interview. But they would remember all kinds of interesting things about like the interrogation techniques. This one person said, I would laugh with them and joke with them. I wanted to feel like I was on their side because this person was born in Germany. So, I mean, some of these Americans who were conducting the interrogations were using every bit of psychology that they could bring to the table, in terms of trying to persuade them to be on their side, or for them to, tell what the Americans wanted to know. You also get the sense that there was a kind of a wide, I think they let the interrogators kind of do what they wanted to do in terms of like what their particular interrogation style was. So some of them were a little more forceful and like, tell us what you know, or I'm going to bring in the Russian agent. And the others might like, put the liquor on the table and start the conversation that way. So you do really get the impression that there was a very wide variety of different interrogation styles that were going on at 1142. And the James Bond stuff was really fascinating. The deck of cards that had the map that really made impression. The box there I got to rifle through had cameras, and the cameras were like hidden to be like a cigarette case or that sort of thing. Maps that were made out of silk, radio sets that were hidden and lighters, all this kind of crazy stuff, which I actually just barely touched on in my story because I was really focused on the human story of the people that were being interrogated and the interrogators. Didn't spend so much time in the James Bond stuff, but there's certainly a lot of stuff there. I would love to take any questions that you guys have. I see one of our commenters says the address is hysterical. And it was. I mean, the idea that you would have the secret code name as the actual address is really a feat of gumption, I guess would be a good word to put it. But it really is striking that the secret code name was actually the mailing address. Do you know how or if this camp was related to the Fairfax camp? No, I don't. Well, this Fort Hunt is in Fairfax County. It's important to note. But no, I don't know if there was a relationship there. I will say that it's really interesting that there is no marker or memorial about, if you go to Fort Hunt today, there's nothing there. There's no signage. There's no indication that any of this stuff went on. And the National Park Service does have a plan to do a little interpretation and put signage up there and kind of remake Fort Hunt. But guess what? There's no money for any of that. And so the National Park Service is actually in the process of rebuilding the George Washington Parkway right now. And so that's kind of, in terms of local projects eating up National Park Service money, the Parkway is going to dominate that for the foreseeable future. Eventually, when they get around to doing this interpretation thing that they've already planned, hopefully, eventually they'll find the money to put the interpretation there. And so this is in the works to have signage, and there's also great artwork too. Like, for the panels, there's like a pool. There's a photograph of the swimming pool, and there are photographs of the Americans and the Germans just leisurely hanging about like it's a beautiful Sunday afternoon. I mean, all the pictures are, like a clubhouse sort of environment, not like a war camp at all. And I think that actually is probably important in sort of giving you a visual sense of what was going on there. So I think anytime, when the National Park Service does get around to putting these historic panels together to interpret what happened at Fort Hunt, the photographs are going to play a very important role in that to give people a sense of kind of what things were like. Is it strange there was no sign about it when they have a little park on the Fairfax site? Yeah, I mean, it is strange that there is no site there. I wish that there, lots of people actually would like to see some kind of interpretation there to let people know what was going on. Sadly, that doesn't exist right now. I don't know, when the money would be around for that. But I would imagine that would be sometime who knows when they're going to get around to funding for it, but they do have a plan. Any other questions? Lynn, I'll throw it to you if you have any questions.
Yeah, I always have a lot of questions. So when you were doing the research and talking to the people at the at the Park Service, did they go into at all, and I don't know if they would even be allowed to talk about, like, did anything of significance come out of any of these interrogations?
I was also curious about that, and I don't know the answer to that. I would imagine there must have been something significant to come out of all of this. The totality of what I had to look at was the transcripts of the interviews. So, in reading through those, I didn't get, and again, we're talking about people's memory of stuff that happened back in the 1940s. So there was nothing that emerged in the transcripts about, like, here's the big piece of information that we got from the Germans that really broke this or that or the other thing. I did not get that from the interviews. And you get the sense that there probably is some sort of secret file cabinet somewhere, right, that does have that sort of information. I didn't have access to that stuff. I just had the interviews with the people. And there were also sort of histories that had been written every now and then. One of the documents I looked at was kind of like a history of Fort Ward, that sort of thing. Fort Hunt. Fort Ward's in Alexandria. A history of Fort Hunt. It's called By the River Potomac. Very well written. That did not have any sort of groundbreaking intelligence. I will say one thing that I came across is this other program, the Miss X program, Mission X program with all the James Bond stuff. I did come across a notice that when the war was over, everything was destroyed. So the other records were destroyed. I mean, like, I think they kept a lot of the stuff that I was rifling through. But, you know, it's possible that if there was an archive of here's all the great things that we learned from the Germans in the interrogation, that all that stuff might have been destroyed. I certainly didn't come across it in my research. And I'd like to think that there was big, important stuff that they discovered there. There's no evidence against that. There's also no evidence for it. But I wish there was an answer to your question, but I don't think there's anything that I could tell you.
Right. Now, and then also when you were doing from all of the different interviews that you were able to go through, were all of the interviews from people stationed at the camp, or was there any information, like you mentioned earlier, about how you think like the neighbors or kind of knew what was going on? Like, were there any interviews from the neighbors that lived around that area? And
no, that in fact, that's the thing about the neighbors sort of knowing what was going on. That did come out of one of these interviews. It's like, how could the neighbors not know what was going on there? Right. None of these interviews were from sort of Fort Hunt neighbors. They were all from the Americans, or the Americans who were there, or the Germans who were there. So we don't really have a kind of neighborhood perspective on that. And it actually does seem kind of doubtful, right? Like it's a
lot of people to have filter through.
It is a lot of people also constantly coming and going. If you think about the total number we're talking about here is 3,500 people coming in and out of this place over a 3-year period. So that's like 1,000 people coming and going, more than 1,000 people coming and going every year in buses basically. So if you are in the neighborhood, you probably would have to know something was going on there, even if you didn't know exactly what was going on there. You clearly knew lots of people were constantly coming and going.
Right. And then did they was there anything in the documents as to, like, come 1945, okay, war's over, what did they do with all these people? Were they just like, all right, we're done, and they just kind of let them go? Or did they?
So no one was there long term. I mean, this is totally a short-term operation for the entirety of its lifetime. I mean, the idea is you would bring them there for the interrogation. So they were really only there for as long as it took to interrogate them, and then they would leave. So it's not like anyone was there for a long term.
Right. But when they leave, would they go back to Germany to fight again?
No, that's another part of this, is that by treating them this way, you could also essentially bring them to America, right? So like by treating them in such a nice way and sort of gaining their trust, that they wouldn't want to go back to Germany, that they would want to stay in America and, use their scientific expertise in America and like assimilate to being American. So that was actually part of the strategy, is make it so they don't want to go back to Germany. So I don't have any data in terms of how many of them decided that they would want to go back. I get the sense that they were treated so nicely, most of these people I mean, I guess this is a guess, I don't know, but like would want to stay in America after being at 1142. Why go back to Germany, right? Right. So the references I did see to like where they physically went, which is what you're asking, is other camps, other sort of more long-term camps. This is a short-term camp. You're only here for the duration of the interrogation. Then you're going off somewhere where it's more of a long-term thing. So that's a good question. Sort of tracking down these people and where did they end up after they left 1142? I don't know the answer to that. Okay.
Yeah, one thing, because I reread the article obviously before we started this, and one thing that I just found it again, because I pulled the link up for somebody else if they want to go read it, but about how one of the strategies that they used were decoy prisoners.
Oh, yeah, I meant to
to
talk about that.
to
Yeah.
kind of, yeah, I was going to say, do
Stool
you want to get
pigeon, the
into
stool
that?
pigeon.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is, they had all these sort of fake things. So they had the fake Red Cross person, they had the fake Russian, they had the fake Canadian. One of the things they did was have other fake prisoners that were called stool pigeons, and they were special training for the fake prisoners. And so the idea was, you get them to talk. So like as I was saying earlier, there's microphones everywhere. So if you're a fake prisoner and you've been trained to do this, and especially if you've got good knowledge of Germany and German geography, you can be like, oh, your hometown was where? Oh, you must have gone to whatever school, you must have known so and so. And so like the stool pigeons were so well trained, they could use these little tricks to gain the trust of the other prisoners and elicit information out of them that way. There was one of the people involved in these notes, John Klug is his name, is the interview happened in 2008 in Charlottesville. He goes into a lot of information about how the stool pigeon worked and the psychology of stool pigeons and the training of the stool pigeons. And yeah, I mean, that was actually one of the strategies to get the information out of the prisoners, is to use fake prisoners. And again, this goes back to a lot of the strategy, the fake Red Cross agent, the fake Russian. The Americans are using every trick they can think of to get information out of these scientists.
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing in the article, I remember that I guess the interrogators used was that if they didn't talk, they kept mentioning that they would be shipped over to Siberia, which would get some people talking.
Yeah, the Germans were afraid of the Russians. They were afraid of going to Russia. They would be treated horribly if that were the case. So, I mean, you get the sense part of them might think, oh, the Americans are bluffing, this is not a real Russian. But then in the back of your mind, you're thinking, okay, well, what if I'm wrong and they actually take me to Russia and I end up in Siberia? That would be horrible. Let me just tell the Americans what I'm thinking. Right. Also, it's interesting that you stumbled over the word interrogators, which is true. Like they actually, they were technically interrogators, but they treated them usually so nicely that that word actually almost seems wrong to use, right?
Right.
So are they really interrogators if they're being treated so nicely all the time? I mean,
right.
Open question for debate. I don't know the answer to that. But yeah, maybe there's another word we can invent that would be put our finger on it a little bit more.
Right. Well, probably, I mean, it probably still works. It's just the stereotype that goes now with the word. I mean, interrogation is just asking questions.
Yeah,
how you go about it is all different.
And as I was saying at the top, when you hear interrogation camp, or a place where prisoners of war were interrogated, you immediately have all these mental images, all of which are horrible, right? I mean, you don't think about, oh, they have a swimming pool, they gave them cigarettes, they took them shopping for ladies' underwear. Like, this is an interrogation camp. It sort of takes everything you think about interrogation camp and turns it upside down. But largely successful. I mean, as I was saying earlier, I don't have any, I wish I did have like, here's all the great intelligence that they gathered, but in all of these oral histories that they did, they all spoke about how important it was to the war effort and how it provided invaluable information. And I don't have any details. I can't tell you what information they got, but I mean, that was a through line with all of these oral histories, is how important this operation was and how successful it was.
Yeah. Yep. So let me do this. Let me go over and allow everybody to talk. If anybody wants to open up and ask a question. So you all, to ask a question, you just have to unmute yourself and go ahead and do that. And then while you guys do that, I will look over on the Facebook page to see if there's any questions over there.
So Facebook is working again, right?
Well, it's saying it's live, so I'm hoping it did.
I think lots of people were holding their breath today about Facebook potentially going off the face of the planet forever.
Facebook was working. Ingrid and I were watching it on that end.
Okay. All right. So Tracey, do you have any questions?
I kept thinking of them, and then somebody else asked them. I mean, you did all of them as far as where did they go and what was the contribution to the war effort. And I mean, it's just fascinating to me, the whole thing. I would love to see the analysis and breakdown on how they ended up actually using it and the various information. But that's another movie.
Right. Yeah, I
Another
don't know
movie,
that
another book. You're going to have to do the research and come back.
You're totally right. I don't know that answer is out there, really. I mean,
right.
So if it's not in the interviews, which it's not, that would have to be a government document of some sort, a trove of government documents. And I did not come across those. If those exist, they would not be in the possession of the National Park Service. They would not be in the box with all this other stuff that I was looking at. They would be, I don't know, at the Pentagon or some secret.
Yeah, I was
CIA.
thinking it's going to be at Langley or CIA Secret Service type scenario as far as how they would take the information, compress it, and then pop it into actual action later. But it's it's incredible, and just the fact, like, I'm shocked that it was so nice. That I mean, given the atrocities that were happening in Europe and in the Pacific, and granted that wasn't a Pacific, it was in the Japanese war camps, etc. It's just pretty amazing that that's
well, that
the
is
case.
actually a salient point, which is you can also read this as the Americans intentionally creating a counterpoint to what's going on in Europe. You know, here in America, this is how we do things. Oh, do you want to go to the ladies' underwear counter? You know, that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, it's funny because last night I actually watched the movie The Railway Man with Colin Firth, and that was about he was a prisoner of war during World War II in Japan, and I mean just the juxtaposition of watching that movie and how they interrogated him because he could listen to a radio versus knowing what was happening over here. I mean, not to say, well, I'm not going to get into political stuff, but not to say
why not?
Don't happen.
On the issue of radio, keep in mind at Fort Hunt before the prisoners were interrogated there, it started out as an operation of the Signal Intelligence Service, right? And so the point was to monitor radio transmissions from Germany and Italy and Japan and Mexico. So it's actually has its roots as a radio facility. Which is really interesting in its own right, sort of how this piece of land evolved as sort of radio transmission, radio intelligence to human intelligence.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, the whole thing is fascinating. And then, and so as Bob had brought up, so I know that are you familiar with what he's talking about? There is somewhere over here, you don't know where I am. I am I'm in Fairfax, just like a mile or two west of Fairfax City. And I do remember coming across, and Bob can vouch for me because he remembers this too. And there's apparently a little sign up, but I didn't know that there was some type of German prisoners of war camp over here on like,
oh wow, okay,
29.
that is, I see now, understand the question. Okay, I did not know about that. No.
Yes. Well, that's all I know. I just had heard somehow that there was one. Apparently there's like a little sign. And I was going to ask if you know anything about that, but.
Well, I don't, but there were references to like, once they left 1142, they went to other prisoner of war camps.
Maybe this was just a long-term holding.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Is maybe it's the sister that is the more long-term location of these places, as opposed to the short-term. You take them there, you show them a good time, you get the questions out of them, then you move them somewhere else, like maybe this Fairfax facility you're talking about. So that would make sense. Yeah. You would have to have some other place to take them, and that certainly would be an ideal candidate.
And if you just think about the mileage and the landscape back then too, Fort Hunt is really only 7 miles south of DC. So that's not far. But to go from there west to where we are now, that was horse country. And the only way there was Duke Street 236, et cetera, to go out. And it was country and farmland. That was it. So, I mean, it would definitely be a little terrifying going across country to the country somewhere for a holding camp in the meantime. Who knows? Also,
it would make sense for a holding camp to be in a more kind of remote area too. I mean, so that seems, the way you laid out the 1940s era history of what that landscape would look like, it would be the kind of place that you could take prisoners to, put a fence up, and have them not probably try to escape. I mean, there was, as I was saying earlier, there was only one person that even tried to do an escape out of this place and was unsuccessful. Like in fact, one of the people that was interviewed for the oral history said, well, where did they think they were going to escape to? Like in reference to this guy that tried to escape, where did he think he was going to go? Like,
Right.
okay, you make it over this 10-foot fence. And then what? I mean, are you going to try to make your way back to Germany? I mean, I guess they did have training for that sort of thing. Maybe their training told them not to do that. I mean, the one guy that did try to escape, he was known as a daredevil. And so that just might've been in his DNA, his personal DNA. He did also kill all these British people as a kind of a war crime, it sounds like. So maybe he was a little off and that's why he tried to escape.
Right. And then the other place I wonder also, I need to remember my history better, is also west of here, was Vint Hill, which I know that was some type of like signal area. And that was even out further west in like Fauquier County. So I think that there was, and I know Vint Hill had stuff going on, like I said, about like signal interpretation and stuff, but there might have been some kind of camp out there as well, because I know that was during World War II.
Well, that would align right exactly with the history of Fort Hunt being a signal intelligence service facility that becomes a German interrogation camp
Right.
until the war is over. So that would actually align perfectly with the kind of arc of at Fort Hunt.
Right. So, all right. Does anybody else have any questions that they want to ask or chime in with? Like I said, if I did it correctly, I believe I unmuted people, so made it to where you could talk. So if you just want to unmute yourself and ask a question.
Yeah, I love the questions. Bring the questions. Come on.
Yeah. So nobody has any other questions? All right, let me see. I think I asked all my questions. And I also know I would have asked a lot of the questions when this article first came out. So, all right. Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining us. This was fascinating. And Michael is going to be back with us in December, talking about one of his books and telling us some tales from his Wicked Northern Virginia book, and just lots. I mean, as we know, with all of the different talks we have on Masters Monday, there's so much history that a lot of people, even if we are natives, don't know about. So he's going to be back in December to join us to talk about that. And then next month, our Masters Monday is actually on November 1st. And we have Roger Schultz, who is the president of the Army Foundation, who's going to be coming on and giving us a virtual tour and talking to us about the new Fort Belvoir Museum. So this was a massive project, and it opened or attempted to open right during COVID, or right before COVID, and had to shut down again. But it is a fascinating place. So he's going to give us a nice virtual tour. So once it does fully open back up to the public, you can go in and know everything that you're going to be able to see. So again, that is November 1st on the first Monday of the month at 7:00. And then Michael will be back with us in December on, let me flip my calendar, which will be December 6th. Will be the first Monday in December. So make sure to join us then. Hopefully we will not be having the same Facebook issues on Mondays that we're trying to get all the information out. But Michael, thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time and to share your knowledge about this, because it is just absolutely fascinating.
Well, this has been fun. I really appreciate the invitation, and I look forward to returning in December.
Great. All right.
Thank you again,
everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good one.